I just want to welcome you to Duke Law School. I'm Trina Jones. I'm the director of the Center on Law, Race, and Policy. And with me is Gio Martinez, who is the executive director of the Center on Law, Race, and Policy. And he is the person, of course, who makes everything happen. We are really excited about today's symposium on AI and marginalized groups. Last night, someone asked me why we decided to put together this particular symposium. It was a good question, given that neither Gio nor I are experts in this area. A year ago, I began hearing a lot about generative AI and its potential effects on teaching, learning, and research. So this was an internal conversation at Duke University. And some participants in these discussions were fearful, and some were tremendously optimistic. I was agnostic because I didn't know what generative AI was, but I knew that what was being discussed was potentially transformative. As I'm always concerned about the effects of any new technology or anything on marginalized groups, I began to look for material about the effects, potential effects of AI on these groups. And not just negative effects, but positive effects as well. Gio, fortunately, was equally intrigued, and so we organized a panel discussion last fall with some of the participants who are here today that was deeply illuminating and stimulating. However, we quickly realized that a panel discussion was insufficient for such a complicated and rapidly changing area. So with the assistance of Margaret Hugh, the back of the room, Jessica Eaglin, and Chaz Arnett, the idea of the symposium was born. We're extremely excited about the series of conversations that are going to take place today, which will focus on media and entertainment, privacy, employment, criminal justice, and democratic governance matters. It's somewhat strange to organize an event on a topic where I have such little expertise. Indeed, I barely know how to refer to the technology, but this is a wonderful way to learn, to assemble a group of truly expert, scholars is just, a wonderful way to learn more about the area. So for those of you who are similarly inexpert like me, please do not feel hesitant throughout the course of today to ask any questions that you may have, and raise any concerns that you may have, because this is the best way to learn. I'm going to turn it over to Gio again, who makes everything happen with the Center on Law, Race, and Policy. But again, welcome.
It is our privilege, ladies and gentlemen, good morning, to welcome you and to welcome each of you to this intriguing and AI and marginalized group symposium. And I say intriguing on purpose. Whether all of you are here in person or folks joining us via live stream, because this is being live streamed, I want to acknowledge our law school for its support of this symposium and our team working behind the scenes to see the whole day through. I also want to, just acknowledge that they've worked hard to pull it off. So thank you. I especially want to thank the Duke University Social Science Research Institute, SSRI, grant program, for it is through its generous grant that today's event is possible. So SSRI, thank you. With that being said, just piggybacking on what Trina mentioned, the Center on Law, Race, and Policy, and it wouldn't be me as executive director if I didn't just acknowledge that the Center on Law, Race, and Policy advances racial equity by empowering the next generation of leaders. Our educational programs, cutting-edge research, and community partnerships foster understanding of the interplay between race, law, policy, and people. This event today furthers the aims of our missions. Now, Trina mentioned some of how she came to this event, and this symposium, and I'll add that years ago, while in practice, I remember encountering technology that was, for me, pretty cool, right? But if manipulated for nefarious reasons, it was pretty scary, especially in the criminal justice context, right? I remember questioning proponents of the technology and the algorithms involved, the extent of the data, and even how to screen for bias. When some of the answers to those questions could not be provided, in my public servant capacity, admittedly, I served as a gatekeeper against it. At the time, I was dealing with AI, but that's not how it was presented or what it was called, if you will. Years later, AI is touted everywhere as this new thing, right? But the reality is that AI has been affecting all of our lives for years. One must therefore ask, well, to what extent, right? And who is benefiting most from this new technology, right? And this is still a human enterprise, dare I say, in my humble opinion. So what about the people, right? As I mentioned, as it relates to our mission, the people, right? Especially those in the shadows, neither seen nor heard. So our hope is that today's symposium will shed light on some of those questions and more, and will provide the space for your intellectual curiosity. With that, I now have the privilege of introducing this first panel of experts. With us today, April Dawson. And point of privilege, April Dawson is a faculty affiliate for the Center on Law, Race, and Policy, so I have to shout that out. So, April Dawson, Associate Dean of Technology and Innovation and Professor of Law at North Carolina Central University School of Law. She's the author of the recently published book, Artificial Intelligence and Academic Integrity. Dean Dawson is a frequent presenter on legal pedagogy and the use of technology and legal education. Professor Dawson teaches and has taught a wide range of courses, including constitutional law, Supreme Court seminar, Towards Artificial Intelligence, Foundations and the Law, and legal technology, equity, and leadership, and serves as a faculty affiliate again for our center. So we have with us April Dawson, and I'll go a little bit out of order, because I have point of privilege. So we also have Sonia Gibson-Rankin. Sonia was also part of our last year's cohort, right? She was one of the ones that led the insightful conversation that we had. She's a professor of law at the University of New Mexico School of Law. Professor Gibson-Rankin is a member of the Interdisciplinary Working Group on Algorithmic Justice, a collaboration of computer scientists, legal scholars, and social scientists from New Mexico who provide insight to attorneys and government officials on issues related to AI. A fellow of the American Bar Foundation, Professor Gibson-Rankin regularly presents on topics such as AI, kinship care, criminal justice reform, implicit bias, inclusive leadership, and Black community empowerment. And last but certainly not least is also a personal friend, Rawa Gebrad, Executive Vice President, Chief Ethics and Legal Compliance Officer for Lionsgate. So it's a pleasure to have you. Welcome to Durham. Previously, Rawa oversees the employment law group for Lionsgate corporate operations and film, television production businesses, and includes including ethics, compliance, and data privacy for Lionsgate's operations in the United States, Canada, UK, and India. Previously, she served as SVP for Business and Legal Affairs. She also advised on labor, employment, corporate governance, executive compensation, data privacy, and compliance issues on pending mergers and acquisitions, and subsequent business integrations, including Lionsgate's acquisition of Starz and investment in Three Arts Entertainment and Pilgrim Media Group. Rawa also played an integral role in advising on legal and personnel issues relating to the company's response to the global pandemic, providing counsel and development of comprehensive health and safety protocols that allowed Lionsgate to resume its film and television production operations around the world. She joined Lionsgate as Director of Business and Legal Affairs in 2014. Previously, she was an associate in the employment practice of Kaufman, Dulwick, and Volok in LA, and Baker McKenzie in Chicago and San Diego. So without further ado, please welcome and give our panelists a warm welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Gio and Trina. I'm going to. I just did something. Press your return. I'm trying to unblink. Thank you. Technology.
See if we need to move the mouse pad.
Well, let's see. It should be Apple TV. Okay, well, I have a couple of demos. We will just go to Plan B. So we are going to be talking about AI, entertainment, and media. And so what I had planned to do is to demo a couple of AI tools that are utilized in the media and entertainment space. So how many of you all are familiar with Runway? Runway?
Runway AI.
Runway AI? So this is a tool, so this is a text to video tool. And so, let's see, Apple TV?
Apple TV.
If you click Apple TV? Oh, okay. So if you put in text, so we're all familiar with ChatGPT, of course, now, November 2022, write me an essay on X, Y, and Z. You have all of this text. And so now, of course, we have text to image, text to video. And when we think about how AI is disrupting the media and entertainment space, we've got to think about these tools. So I may have an opportunity to demonstrate that. But there's another tool that I may have a chance to demonstrate. How many of you are familiar with Notebook, Google Notebook, LM? All right, you heard about, okay, so this is like amazing. And this actually was just released. So you can take your notes, upload it to a Google Notebook. Google Notebook will analyze the notes, create summaries, also create an audio file that is a podcast. And so that was something that I wanted to demonstrate. So even if I don't have an opportunity to demonstrate, that's fine. I strongly encourage you to fool around with these tools, because when we think about how AI is going to impact us, it's one thing to hear about it, to see it, and to have an impression. And it's another thing to really delve into the tools and to use the tools and to have a firsthand knowledge, or to have firsthand knowledge about how these are going to impact our lives. All right, so what I'm going to ask our wonderful panelists to do, I have an easy job. I'm just asking questions and we'll be able to hear their brilliance. But I'm going to ask each of them if they would just share their initial thoughts for about 5 minutes. And then I've got some questions for them, and then we'll have time for Q&A as well. All right, so, all right, Rolla.
All right, I'll go ahead and kick it off. Hi, everybody. How you doing today? Oh, has the coffee kicked in? Okay, it's kicked in. It's kicked in for me, thankfully. I was a little concerned, but I'm so happy to be here today. Thank you all for having me, and very excited to be here with these very distinguished panelists. The work that I focus on at Lionsgate, and I think Gio shared some of that with this group when introing me, focuses on employment, both on the corporate and the production side, data privacy, and ethics and compliance. And that work, of course, very significantly intersects with the emergence of generative AI use in the entertainment space. For example, in employment, what we're seeing is very enterprising employees, both on the corporate and the production side, very excited about these new tools like ChatGPT or Runway. Actually, fun aside, Lionsgate just signed an agreement to explore with Runway their capabilities, and it's in the press this week. Check out the Hollywood Reporter. So if you're interested in learning more about Runway, Lionsgate just entered into a partnership with them to explore their capabilities. But we want to make sure if we have employees, let's say in marketing or the creative functions, who are looking to maybe either work more efficiently or create, maybe they're just putting things into ChatGPT, for example, and maybe those things that they're putting into ChatGPT are actual confidential proprietary information that somehow end up in the cloud. We need to be able to put guardrails around that. So from an employment standpoint, it's very important that we are on top of what our employees are doing to ensure that they're not going rogue. They're excited, but don't want them to go rogue. We want to make sure that they have the proper guardrails to operate. On the data privacy side of things, how are we ensuring that the development and the deployment of AI doesn't result in this inadvertent use of personally identifiable information, commonly referred to as PII in the data privacy space? And also because these AI systems process a vast amount of personal information, the line between utility and intrusion really does become increasingly blurred. So we have to be careful there. And that comes up just in my day-to-day. I wish I could say I'm an expert in this space, also as another aside, but what I am an expert in, I'm not, but I'm an expert in rapidly changing tides, right? So that I would say is something to keep in mind as we all look to what the future of AI is. Just, are you able to be nimble? Are you able to be quick and shift with how quickly this whole movement is moving? Finally, there's the ethics piece of it all that impacts the work that I do. How do we create an ethical framework for the growing and this rapidly evolving use of AI? We can incorporate transparency, we can incorporate accuracy, we can ensure that algorithms are non-biased, but that is an ongoing conversation, much like the ongoing conversations in employment and data privacy. I definitely had some anxiety about being here because I do not brand myself as an AI expert, but again, like I said, the work that I do, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, but there are practice areas that many of us are involved in that are moving with this, moving into this AI space, and so we have to be prepared to meet the challenges and these rapidly evolving areas of law, IP, copyright, data privacy. They're all going to have this AI component, and so what I'm tasked with, what my colleagues are being tasked with, my general counsel, our chief information officer, is how do we evolve the work that we currently do to meet the daily rising challenges of AI. But yeah, excited to be here.
All right. Thank you, Rala. Good morning, good morning. We've already done this. Good morning, good morning. There we are. Thank you to Trina and Gio and April and Rawa. I'm so honored to be here. And I'm so grateful to Rawa being on the ground and kind of watching, being part of this rapid changing tide. My background's in computer science. April and I talk about it a lot. And so we've watched this technology go pretty broad, watching the conversation from algorithms to the distinctions of AI. And with my work at the University of New Mexico School of Law and my work as an affiliated faculty with Africana Studies, I tend to really want us to make sure to pause and kind of catch a couple of things that we're seeing, especially as it's going to impact media and entertainment. And being from Albuquerque, New Mexico, we're really, really excited because of our partnerships in the media and entertainment industry. So this is a really big deal. But I wanted to focus on the impact of this evolving technology in terms of the role of media stereotypes and what can occur. And this was an interesting quote from Oda Khan in 2023. We are fast approaching a tipping point where non-human generated content will vastly outnumber the amount of human generated content. And of course, all of my good lawyers in here already see some asterisks within that statement, right? What is human generated? What is non-human generated? How will we define it? And whether it's going to be audio or video or images or text, where does that line and boundary draw as we think about copyright? And in particular, what will that do in instances when the AI just can't see all of us? You may have seen this report from NPR last year in which they were trying to do something unique. We can use the AI to create images and save us time in a road trip to Africa if we can get some images designed. And they asked the AI using Midjourney, can you please create Black African doctors treating white children? And the AI didn't know what to do. It was like, cannot compute, right? It said, well, do you want a white doctor treating Black children? No, I didn't ask that. Do you want some animals? No, we don't want animals. I mean, it just could not comprehend this. And I think a lot about what we know in terms of what the world looks like. When we think about pigmentation as a small example, right, whether it's pigmentation or hair texture or distinctions, what does the AI capture about who we are? And I'm using we in the global space. This is not a thing that is ever going to be able to be United States centered or just the nuances of being in this country, because this is a world gathering thing. And an interesting report that I encourage you to check out from Bloomberg Technology saw that humans are biased, but generative AI is even worse. Here's an interesting study. You may be familiar with the Fitzpatrick scale, which has this idea there's about 6 different major pigmentations and that people fall within certain sets of categories. And in their study, they asked the AI to generate images by profession. Anything catch your attention? Now, I'll tell you the truth. I am a Black lawyer. I'm well aware that we are part of less than 5% of the entire population. I don't think lawyers so wrong or judges so wrong. I'm also a computer scientist. I don't think engineers so wrong. But there's something about this low-paying occupations that should catch your attention because it's dead wrong. It's completely wrong. And what we've discovered, there's an interesting paper out of Nature that shows how often the AI just cannot tell what people's actual professions are. If you're a woman, you're going to be a nurse. That's just what you do. If you're a person of color, you're just going to be cleaning houses. And that's not true, even just looking at United States demographics, right? So when I raise this issue, it becomes even more extreme when we start asking the AI, you could imagine in media, normal tropes that we'll see that will say, we need a criminal element, we need a terrorist idea, we need someone who's a drug dealer. And the AI, these are composites of who they make them look like. If you are an inmate, you can see on the left the distribution of skin tones, which you know by United States data is completely not true. It's not true. So when we start to ask the AI to create the images of tomorrow, when we ask it to be part of this thing of the media and entertainment, when it can make so many things possible, what will it do? And what we already know is that we're also studying another great article out of Nature, which talks about covert racism in AI and how large language models are just ending up reinforcing our outdated stereotypes. They're furthering, entrenching what it thinks we are or are not based off of some kind of media search. What does this look like? Well, the UN has done a study on racism and AI, and we're already aware that racism from the past leads to bias in the future. This is going to be a continued theme throughout our day, but the bigger part of what I think is going to make our day extra special is what do we get to do next? Because we're well aware that our AI biases are these computational biases that are based on human biases, that are based on systemic biases, and that we've got an opportunity, maybe, to do something a little different. We're already starting to see the changing growth of data sets, right? There's an interesting project out of the SMU lab, another interesting project out of the NYU Tendron lab, looking at what is the impact of creating intentionally culturally diverse data sets. This access to data that informs everything else we look at is going to be pretty critical. But I always ponder this question: should the Black community and other marginalized populations want to be included in the data? This is harder to wrestle with. This is where we get to have a pretty complex conversation, because after 400 years in this nation, the Black story has been captured and it has been used to destroy and separate and divide. What can we do differently right now about this? I'm so excited to be part of this conversation. That's my AI lady. I like her afro. But I'm super excited to be part of this with everyone. So grateful to be here.
Excellent. Thank you both for those initial remarks. So Rawa, you work in California in the entertainment industry, the sexy place.
That's what they say, I guess.
And we know in 2023, of course, we had the Screen Actors Guild strikes and the writers strikes, and that really had an impact on the creation of media. And a lot of the disputes kind of centered around AI. What can you share with us on how those discussions and the view of AI, how is that impacting the industry and your job in particular?
How much time do you have? Well, first, okay, just as another disclaimer, I will say my work in the labor and employment space is more employment centered. Although I was a labor lawyer earlier in my career, more so in hospital spaces, labor in entertainment is highly specialized. And there are not a lot of experts, and they are not only specialized to labor, but they're also specialized to specific guild rules. Guilds being, of course, the labor unions for the different entertainment, subsections of entertainment employees, such as the Screen Actors Guild and the Writers Guild. But there is significant overlap in my work with my labor colleagues. I work with them quite frequently, particularly in my work advising on the production side. So to your question, I would say, and I think many of my colleagues in the entertainment industry on both sides, studio side and production side, would agree that the strikes vastly expedited and accelerated the conversation around AI. I mean, things were already moving quickly, but both from a content creator and a studio side perspective, things really kicked up in 2023. And let me back it up a little bit here. So as you said, there were two strikes in 2023, the WGA strike and the SAG-AFTRA strike. And after 148 and 118 days, respectively, the Writers Guild as well as SAG-AFTRA reached agreements on the contracts with their studios. And just so you know, the reason for the strikes is the collective bargaining agreements were soon to be expired. They get renewed every few years, and there's always pretty healthy debate and negotiation around the time of the negotiation of the CBAs. But what's happened, of course, since the last time that these CBAs were negotiated is that there has been this increase in AI, just AI use and AI concern around the impact that will have on folks that work in the entertainment industry. There are really key parallels between the generative AI concerns between the two, both of the two strikes. So in both of them, the union members really feared that the studios would effectively just utilize these generative AI to perform tasks that ordinarily would be performed by paid workers such as actors and writers. So if I can go to the SAG-AFTRA side of things, that AI issue was actually, there were many issues to be resolved, but that was, I think, the one that was more in focus, and it was one of the last issues to be resolved during their negotiation. And their concerns were around digital replicas of individual performers and entirely AI-generated synthetic performers. And I don't want to get too in the weeds here, but you've got these digital replicas, which are essentially based in employment. Like, for example, you've taken video of me as an actor reading from a script in front of a very specific set. Now you want to switch out the set behind me and replace it with another set. That would be like a digital replica. And then there's the synthetic side of things. So synthetic replicas where you're essentially just creating from scratch, from the AI cloud, a synthetic version of me, maybe just a model of my face, a model of my voice, not utilizing anything that I've actually ever said, or even make any outfit that I've actually ever worn, or any makeup that I would have worn. So that presentation is entirely synthetic. On the writer side, so those were two big issues let me go back, for SAG, those were two really big issues, and they wanted to create some consent around the utilization of these replicas. While they were able to make some headway with respect to these digital replicas and built in certain consent requirements, there were fewer consent requirements that were built in on the synthetic replica side, and I imagine that those will be addressed in 2026 when these issues are raised again. I imagine also there are going to be a lot of changes between now and then. On the writer's side, the WGA agreement established that AI couldn't undermine a writer's credit or be used as a way to reduce a writer's compensation. But it did leave room for studios to train AI using pre-existing material. So that is another outstanding issue that will likely be further negotiated in 2026. So we'll see where things go. I mean, a lot of what's really driving this is the economic pressure that the entertainment industry is facing. And I don't know how many of you have been paying attention to what's going on. I mean, I'm obviously have my own subscription to the LA Times, and I work in the entertainment industry, but every other day there's a conversation about how folks are getting laid off and there isn't as much content. The creation of content dropped off precipitously after the conclusion of the strikes, and for a variety of reasons. And right now, what studios and production companies are tasked with doing is creating more with less, and that's where AI comes in. So that is the change that I think has really come about as a result of the strikes. I'm not looking at it as bad or good. I try not to add value judgments to these things. It's just yet another change. And in the past 10 years that I've been at Lionsgate, and the 10 years that I have been in-house in entertainment, there have been a variety of things that we've worked through for the evolution of the work that it is we do, from the Me Too movement to COVID, which of course accelerated work from home. I mean, this is just yet another thing that we're working through, but it wouldn't have been accelerated in the way that it has now, I think, without the strikes.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. It's interesting that you talk about 2026, and we know that these tools, like the tools that we have right now, it's so easy for someone who doesn't have expertise to create content. Mm-hmm. What will these tools look like in 2 years, right? This is the worst that they are going to be at this mm-hmm. moment, and they're only going to get better.
Like the iPhone camera, that's what I liken it to, we'll see. The pictures from iPhone 3 mm-hmm. are starkly different from what they are now. I don't know what year you guys have, but things are going to be very, very different in 2 years.
So Sonia, in your initial presentation, you talked about biased data, you talked about representation, and of course we see that in the entertainment and content creation space as well. So in light of the research that you do and the points that you made in your presentation, what impact or what should writers and actors of color be thinking about in terms of the impact that the biases will have on their work?
I think that's fantastic to be mindful of, right? If you're in the process of creating content, where do you all get your content from today? How many are going to go to TikTok to see what is the next song to do? I mean, all these are places where mm-hmm. people go, right? And, I come from the era when we all grew up on record albums from the 70s that we heard completely sampled and put into music in the 90s, right? What does sampling look like if it's the AI drawing it or not? This is why the California Consumer Privacy Act, this is why our foundation of data, if you really understand how the AI works, you've got to appreciate that it is so different than the coding models that we came up in, right? It's not the if then else statements. It's something very different. It is data centered. So with the CCPA, I encourage all of you to really study it and its impact. It's going after where did the data come from and putting in some protections of the EU AI Act and the EU GDPR and this understanding of the right to be forgotten from the GDPR, and what does the impact of access to data do or not do. This is something that creatives are going to have to think of, particularly from marginalized populations, because if the way I get the contract with Google or to be getting an extra check on YouTube is because I put it on TikTok, but is that where the data source is coming from? How do I protect it? How do I come up with something that is original or not? And we know from US copyright that we've got to be very mindful and looking at what is the distinction between completely human generated with a mix of AI generated. How do you protect your name? I think for communities of color in particular and marginalized populations, they're going to have to get legal resources to really protect their information to the best of their extent. But we don't know what that looks like because this is what the technology is now. In 2026, I'm excited, personally, I'm really excited to see what it'll do in 2026. But when I would talk with people about protecting their data just 4 or 5 years ago, that was just watching to see if they take a video, your video you already made, and put it in another platform. Not what if they take me saying good morning and now have me saying good night. And what does that look like?
Mm-hmm. If I could jump into
that
though, as well. I think one of the things that marginalized creators would have in their corner is the fact that while the government is moving slowly, the government is moving. Mm-hmm. And I'll say the California government is moving. Yes. Let me be very specific here. Because California is the hub. It is the center of the entertainment industry. At least we like to think it is for now. We'll see if that continues. But it is. And just this past week, our governor, Governor Newsom, mm-hmm. came down to Los Angeles he signed a couple of bills into law and came down to SAG-AFTRA's offices to green light, if you will, these two bills at the offices. And the first bill bars contract provisions that facilitate the use of digital replicas of a performer in a project instead of an in-person performance from that human being, unless there's this what they call a reasonably specific description of the intended use of the digital replica. And the performer was represented by legal counsel. So that's a positive. And I think that mm-hmm. these protections are slowly but surely coming. Second one, this isn't really as exciting for the living, but it does require entertainment employers to gain a consent of a deceased performer's estate before using a digital replica of that person. So things are happening, and there is extreme pressure. There's a lot of lobbying, I imagine, on both sides. To our governor, to our representatives, to make some moves here. And I think California has been a leader. As you mentioned, the CCPA has been a leader from a privacy perspective. I imagine that California will also continue to be a leader on the AI front as well, both in support of studios and the like, as well as performers.
And on that point, California, what is it, SB 1047, that's the AI law that has passed both houses of the California Assembly, and Governor Newsom will have to decide whether he's going to veto that by the end of this month. And so you've got the California congressional delegation opposing it. You've got Elon Musk in favor of it. So that's something that is cutting edge, you know, so we'll definitely have to keep our eye on that.
Yeah, for the law students in the room, put your Google alerts on if this is an area of interest for you. Seriously, particularly in the entertainment industry. I don't know, start with Newsom. You know, he'll be start with Newsom, you know, AI, bills. I mean, seriously, there's a lot of movement, and it's happening this year. So if that's a space that you're interested in, particularly in entertainment, I would encourage you to really stay locked into to your news alerts.
When Trina gave her initial remarks, she mentioned, you know, AI, the challenges associated with AI, but also what are the opportunities as it relates to AI. So when we think about marginalized communities and communities of color and underrepresented, and we think about how AI may impact them in a negative way or in a challenging way, there's also something on the other side, right? As these barriers are being lowered, can they utilize these tools to get their stories and their messages out? And so, Raba, let's start with you. What are your thoughts about how these tools can be used to benefit underrepresented communities?
Yeah, well, I know I'm studio side, so I do try to have a very positive perspective. I try to have a positive and optimistic perspective overall, but it's not all doom and gloom. This is exciting. I mean, these changes that are coming have significant opportunities for marginalized content creators, not only studio side, and they offer some significant advantages that I think if we focus on, and that creators focus on, they can use them to streamline their workflows and make a lot of very tedious tasks around content creation easier. I don't want to get too entertainment-y, you know, on you, but things such as location scouting and visualization, for example, these are very highly effort-intensive tasks, and there are tools that are making that easier. A filmmaker can just upload a quick location video and then use the tool to create these photorealistic models for 3D visualization. Also, don't need to go through scripts for hours on end. There are tools that read scripts in seconds to analyze it, to identify patterns and narratives. Doesn't mean that we don't need the human touch, but there are things that we can do to cut down, or content creators and studios can do to cut down on some of the work that has been more tedious over the years. And they can even, some of these tools are even working to accurately predict how well, you know, each script will do in terms of commercial success. We'll see. I don't know. I mean, a lot of that is very human driven, but I'm curious to see where that will go and how that will guide, for example, writers. And same thing with animators. This is going to be a very big deal for folks in the animation space and content creators. The barrier to entry in content creation, particularly for marginalized creators, has been lowered with the widely available use of social media. So TikTok, YouTube, you know, Twitch, all of these sites, and there are going to be AI components that work within these various social media apps that I think are going to enhance the capabilities. Now there are obviously some downsides. I'll let you speak to that. But I'm feeling very positive about the possibilities. And like with anything new, it's going to be a bit of a bumpy road, but excited to see how it all plays out.
If I could just also add, I think we're going to watch, I think this barrier to entry is going to be a bigger deal than not, right? The amount of tools one needs, the price of the production opportunities is going way down, the amount of power of a machine. I mean, the laptops you have in front of you can do a lot of these computations that it really needs. And it just takes a couple extra new video cards, and you'll be surprised at what you're able to generate on your own. And then from there, going to these social media platforms, going in all of these ways where things go viral very rapidly, people are able to get their products in front of all kinds of spaces. I know we all believe we sing amazingly in the shower, but what if you could just actually hit that note, right? What would that do? And how does that kind of change our ideas of what talent is, right? Does talent now add in another component? I think this will be very interesting because I just saw this amazing thing. It turns out if I tell you, think of an apple, how many of you see an actual photorealistic apple? And how many see white space in the word apple, right? It turns out our brains don't all see things the same. I'm fascinated by this, right? What if, though, you've got a thing in your head, but like me, you can't even draw a straight line, but there's a thing here that you want to get out there because you're a different type of creative. These tools are going to really, really expand the barriers we had that says it needs to be written on paper with these number of spaces. I'll just have the AI help me close some of those gaps, which we know for people that are marginalized, where English is not their first language, where they just see the world differently. The tech can start to help to translate things to mass markets.
If I could jump back in again.
Please.
Becoming a theme here, sorry y'all. Another piece of this is going to be job creation. And I think many people think of the emergence of AI as, oh gosh, this is going to be significant job elimination. And how I try to think of it, it is going to not only create jobs, but also strengthen the current way in which people work, maybe help them build out their positions differently. And I'd like to give a couple of examples there. For example, with creators adopting more of these AI storytelling tools, there's definitely going to be an increased demand for analysts who have to assess and refine the content to make sure that the storylines flow in a natural and human way, right? So it doesn't matter if there's this script, if it just doesn't make sense when you're actually reading it. There's going to be actual human speak that's going to be needed there. You're going to need actual humans for that. That'll be a cool shift in terms of job creation there. There's also going to be a big demand for developers who are going to create this user-friendly generative AI and these algorithms that is going to cater to the various entertainment functions. So there are going to be new legal experts, new ethical experts. I mean, I think there's a wide range, and we're going to talk a little bit later on about kind of getting into this space as a lawyer. But there are this is a whole new industry that's popping up right now, and I think that's also another way I try to look at it when I get nervous about where this could go.
Yeah, thank you both. Sonia, when you were talking about you have something in your head and you want to get it out and how these tools are able to help us, I wanted to just highlight something that you mentioned when we're talking about marginalized communities, people with disabilities, right? And how these tools are able to help them as well. But I wanted to ask you both, actually, Sonia, we'll start with you. As we're thinking about, both of you have talked about how these tools will help marginalized communities create content. That raises intellectual property concerns, right? And so what does the IP issues, copyright issues, ownership issues, if the AI is creating it, can you get IP protection? Sonia, can you talk a little bit about some of the IP implications when AI is being used to create media and entertainment?
So this is going to be a really big deal, right? The Copyright Office is coming up with some broad categories we want to think about, right? If there is no human input, we just put in 6 or 7 keywords into the AI and it creates an image. We've decided that counts as public domain. If someone else grabs it, you can often run with it. If there is human, is in part of the human input is creative. Oh, this is our asterisk, right? What is creative? Well, then human is the author. There may be able to have copyright protections in there. And then we've got to see if the human had some limited input. Likely not protectable by copyright, and we're going to have to look at what some of those distinctions mean. What do I mean in all of that? We're going to have to really articulate what is the expressive elements of human authorship and inventorship. What is the expressive part of it? Now, is it your ability to come up with a really 6 or 7 strong keywords that generated the image? or the video? Or is it your ability to decline the first 7 that it created and approve and ask it to tweak it along the way? Where will creative impact be? I've seen so many people, you can just do a Google on Etsy, where people have already put in keywords for people that are like, I can't even come up with the 6 or 7 keywords. I want a picture of a happy family at the beach. Somebody else will know the right combination of words. And it was very interesting to watch people attempt to say, I came up with those 6 or 7 words in that order that generated the image. What we're also going to be watching, though, is where is it getting the data to get the idea that those 6 or 7 words creates that image. So we're already seeing people like Scarlett Johansson, George R.R. Martin, who are really raising the claim of, well, you wouldn't have gotten there but for a version of my voice, or, why would it know what the style of how George R.R. Martin would write would be anyway? I'm an old school fan of fan fiction, right? We've been doing this forever. There are so many versions of Pride and Prejudice. The zombies is when I know they've gone too far. But think about it, right? At some stage, is that an infringement, or is that in tribute to it? When do we start to say that this is out of bounds? So this idea of deep fakes, we already saw this happen with Robin Thicke and Blurred Lines and the Marvin Gaye estate in terms of that cowbell. I'm so intrigued about the cowbell. Where will the boundaries change? So I think this is going to be a really fun time.
And I think also from a cultural appropriation standpoint, how many of you in this room remember when this AI-generated duet of Drake and The Weeknd was issued, and then it was submitted to the Recording Academy for consideration of a Grammy? That's just this year. Gosh, what is time? But there was a lot of consternation around the issue, of course. These are both creators, Drake and The Weeknd, who come from marginalized communities, but obviously are very well resourced, and but they were, of course, able to utilize those resources in order to take that down and push back on that. But that's not going to be the case for many other, content creators who come from marginalized communities. They're not going to be resourced in that way necessarily. So what you may see is work that is popular, like a Drake or Weekend, or in a popular style, right? And that is recreated in ways via AI tools that does not benefit those communities, right? Or does not benefit those creators. So it'll be very interesting to see where that goes. I think the Recording Academy put up some, I'm not in the music industry, so let me make that clear, but they put up some very temporary, evolving, I would say more evolving guardrails around the issue, because it came up so close to the Grammys, and it was a very big issue involving 2 of music's biggest stars. But this is going to continue to be an issue, particularly I think in the music space. You're going to see that, but also it has the potential to expand well beyond that.
If I could, now that you're reminding me, who remembers the creation of the AI rapper? Right, it was a Black gentleman who gave some voice samples, and I think in the world of gaming, we're also going to see this for anyone interested in the space of gaming. But this gentleman sold his voice. We talked about James Earl Jones selling the rights to his voice to Disney, right? But this gentleman sold his voice because he thought it was going to be recorded, or he says he thought it was going to be recorded or used for something else. They turned him into a rapper, and then they made the most extreme, stereotypical rap image, AI avatar to go along with it. And the creators of all this were not Black at all, right? And so we're going to have to watch where this cultural appropriations, who's going to determine what makes it on our screens and on our devices and what we listen to. We're going to have to, I'm going to say, not only do we need humans in the loop, I need you to be critical humans in the loop. It's so easy to fall into confirmation bias with AI. Say it looks right, it sounds right, it seems okay. But we have an opportunity to make sure that some boundaries stay in, but it's going to have to be the critical human in the loop.
And I think that leads to a point that we need to underscore often, which is even if you're paying for the tool, but especially if you're not paying for the tool, anything you put into these systems will be used by the creators of these tools and who knows who else. So if you are, to the cultural appropriation point, if you are just, April Dawson and you're putting something in that's very cool, someone could take what I've created, to create something and they monetize it. So we have to be really mindful of what we're putting into these tools. I want to get to this last questions and then we'll open it up to questions from the audience. And so, Rala, you mentioned that we were going to talk about how those who are interested, new lawyers, old lawyers, soon-to-be lawyers who want to get into the talent legal space, who want to focus on the impact of technology or being having an understanding of technology so that they could better represent their clients. Can you talk about what that space might look like, or what folks who are interested in moving into that space should be thinking about and doing?
I think you're certainly going to see, and I'm already seeing these pop-ups of these subgroups within technology law groups at various law firms. Of course, not every law firm has or has a technology group or is technology centered. But I think that it's important for those who are looking to get into that space to get experience in other areas that really dovetail quite nicely, like I said, with this emergence of AI, IP, copyright, licensing. I'm just thinking, of course, entertainment-wise, data privacy. Hey, I mean, ethics. I think there's going to be a very interesting evolution of the use of ethics in AI, and who knows? We'll maybe here next year talking about that. We'll see. I'll be in the audience. But and all of these longer standing practice areas are going to be, if they haven't already, developing these sub niche areas around AI. And it's exciting. I liken it to, and I think I said this to both of you when we met previously, to the emergence of cannabis law. And being in California for as long as I've been, to see the emergence of cannabis law just over the course of the past decade has honestly been fascinating to watch. And I think that AI and the emergence of that as a practice area is going to be patterned after that in some way. You're going to see the conferences pop up, the different articles, you're going to the different working groups. And I think, and much like cannabis, I mean, these are folks who work in, who maybe worked in agriculture, who worked in food and beverage industry. And these are areas that are much more established, but would have these subgroups so that ultimately evolved into maybe their standalone firms. We have a bunch of, cannabis only firms in California now, and I imagine that's going to be the case. Yeah, and then, you're also going to see this in government. How could I leave out government? Of course, there's going to be a significant, and there already is, lobbying component to this, and working with our government officials and leaders to better understand what the future of AI is for the various states, federally. There's a lot of opportunity here if we just build upon what we already know and what's already available to us. So if you're interested in the evolution of AI as a practice area, I would take a look at the evolution of cannabis, and I think it's going to really dictate a lot of how that moves forward.
If I could also add, I'm not sure where your engineering campus is in relationship to here, but go there. You've got to know what's coming next with the tech. It is,
Absolutely.
The reason that April and I get so excited is because, in the world of AI, it was happening in these silos. The robotics people were doing one thing, the vision people were doing another, the audio people. It was all happening differently. And then someone said, let's slip in linguistics. Everything you're seeing right now is because of a different field that was added in, right? So who knows what the next thing that will slip into what the artificial intelligence is doing, the same way that we would have counseled people years ago a little bit differently on how to best protect your invention or your idea or your voice, changed rapidly with AI and synthetic data. What's coming next? And they're already very excited over in the tech community with what's coming next. I'll tell you the truth, though. We are starting to see that it's leveling out. It was very exciting. We're about last 18 months, it's leveling a bit, right? So it's getting a little more established. But if you understand the way tech works, we don't have a very long window before the what's next is. Understanding our true ethics about what matters to us will need to be a pretty strong foundation that we're going to build on generally.
All right, excellent. All right, we have about 10 minutes left. We want to make sure that we answer any questions that you all have. So let's see. Any questions? Yes, right here. And if you wouldn't mind, state your name and if you're a student or if you're a faculty member.
Hello, thank you so much for the insightful discussion. My name is Jordan. I'm a 1L JPLM student at Duke. Since you brought it up, the issue with James Earl Jones, they're creating a new Mufasa movie, and he's gone, and I'm correct. But
We all are.
the issue that I'm hearing, the you've spoken a lot about the writing and creatives, but typically voice actors, and this happens a lot with gaming and in the anime world, and now here with Disney utilizing James Earl Jones' voice in the future. Do you see this as an opportunity for marginalized communities to keep these voices maintained in perpetuity, or is this another risk of losing some of those voices that the community would have previously owned? And I think a lot of this goes into protection. How do marginalized communities protect Black voices who convey a lot of Black stories? And a similar situation happened with John Witherspoon. I don't know, he voiced Granddad in Boondocks. His son, a professional voice actor, wanted to continue voicing, and they were actually moving towards using AI instead. And so this issue of if the family wants to maintain the voice, or who owns the voice and how it can be used forever, what do you guys think about these situations?
Ooh, that's powerful. I mean, first of all, James Earl Jones, the king of Pride Rock, the king of Zamunda. I mean, the king of the Death Star.
Fellow Michigan grad also, so gotta plug Go Blue.
I think, where do I sell my voice? Disney's got an image, right? Disney's going to want to maintain things. We already know this Mufasa storyline is just changing all of the lore of Pride Rock to begin with. But what happens when it goes, what if he would have said that's too far? I don't want it used that way. He sold the rights. I do wonder, I'd love your thoughts on this, Rawa and others. I am uncertain about what people know they're selling, right? Am I selling my voice to be used to talk about civil rights issues or to sell toothpaste? Right. And maybe I'm not a fan of Crest. I'm a Colgate person. I don't want it used in that kind of way. I think you're absolutely right. And how does one put those protections in? And how does your estate follow on to make sure that it is within the bounds of whatever was in the category, what would have mattered to them?
Speaking to estates, I mean, let's talk about the dead here for a little bit, because I think with the living, obviously it's quite a bit more complicated. It's complicated on both ends, so let me not say that. But one of your questions, I believe, was, do you think that this will be positive? I'm rephrasing here, for content creators from marginalized communities. And I think back to, do you remember when there were these holograms?
I was thinking about that too.
Whitney Houston, was it Whitney Houston,
Tupac, Michael Jackson.
I think, I think there's absolutely going to be an exploitation from the estates, exploitation in the legal sense, of the voices of these
Beloved people.
Exactly, beloved people, and also perhaps for people who have gone well before their time. You're seeing, for example, in hip hop, a lot of, unfortunately, creators in that space, you see them die early, die young, right? It's just, throughout the news. So what we're seeing, what we may see, of course, is a utilization of the works that they've created thus far to take care of their estate, their families on a go-forward basis. So there, I see some positive aspects to this, but if things aren't locked down, to your point, it can be the use of one's name, likeness, image, voice can be very easily manipulated. And so that is going to be a very challenging issue, because there are issues that people haven't even thought of yet that others are already thinking of. And so negotiating in those early stages is going to be critical. Also for deals that have already been struck, I think that's going to be a challenge, because nobody contemplated this 30 years ago, right?
When Prince died, you may remember they had an extensive catalog that he chose not to release. His estate did, right? And so he would not, I don't know Prince, I have no connection to him nor his estate, but you never heard a Prince song in a commercial, and then all of a sudden they were in commercials, right? And particularly remembering that the United States is not the only entertainment space. We knew for decades that many U.S. celebrities would film and record things internationally that they didn't want in the U.S. market, and then we watched that change. Well, what happens if those rights are sold in other countries or used without one's permission? One of my friends is in entertainment, and people post pictures of a stock image of her and all kinds of billboards around the world. And she's like, I've never been there, but they caught my picture somewhere online. So we are very intrigued with some of those things about what they're going to do. What people would want, the living, the dead, you're right. That's also take your estate planning class. That's always a good one.
Yes.
Jessica.
Jessica Eatland, Cornell Law School professor. So I'm intrigued by this question about sort of creativity, and the way that I sort thinking about that streaming service where like if you put in like, you know, I don't know, Anita Baker or something like that, and it'll give you all these other songs that you probably like if you like her. But I always used to hear this joke where it's like, you know, you can put in any name, and eventually if you listen to it long enough, it's going to go to John Mayer. and they're saying like, oh, it's probably because something about the algorithm, et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, so my question is about creativity and sort of like creating to like the masses and the ways that that might shape sort of what we consume in society, and like does that create sort of more opportunities for, you know, sort of outside of mainstream marginalized creators, or does that in fact sort of hinder the ability to shift sort of what we consume as mainstream? In other words, like, is the expansion of AI sort of locking us into one particular sort of idea of what mainstream culture and society is, and how could we imagine AI being valuable to sort of push against that trend?
If, you know, let's do a little thought exercise. Roses are red, violets are
Blue.
Hands have fingers, feet have
Toes.
Cherries are red, grapes are
Green and or purple.
Who decides? I think your comment is the big deal, right? Does the algorithm decide? How many of you are green grape people? Who here is a red grape or purple? Who likes that cotton candy grape that I don't understand? I mean, the algorithm at some stage, something has decided, and this is why that access to data is such a big deal. What makes it turn back that way, right? Who's going to decide that this is or is not the foundation? I was explaining to some younger people about that the reason we've got AM radio stations and what used to be known as race music, right? If you were listening to music by Black Stars, they were going to be on the AM station. They didn't work everywhere, but the FM station that more people could access, and radio play, and the history about what got into circulation, and the broadness of pop as an industry versus maybe R&B or rap, right? And in terms of the size, a great colleague of mine, Jamie Kagunga, entertainment attorney in Houston, talks about this, that he's working to make sure his clients are on certain list, because that's where you get the hits, the streams, and all those things. This access to data, what's out there, just because you're not going to play an old 80s gospel song that I know very, very carefully in my niche community doesn't mean that it's not something that shouldn't be captured in some way. I think you're absolutely right of concerns about what is informing what we're all going to hear or what the final composite will look like.
I think, yes, I agree with all of that. And I also think that issues of plagiarism with respect to AI are going to continue to be a concern for those who are concerned about the erosion of human creativity. But on the other end of things, I think it might create a bit of a counterculture movement, right? Which often happens when there's some type of mainstream push. So I think those who are really dedicated to the creation of their art and the sustainability of their art may have a very unique voice in this space. Now, whether it will, as it always has been, be costly to be in that space, but I feel like there are two sides to this.
My daughter's part of the creative community. We were talking about just this idea about the impact on animators, and the more things look the same, the more the uniqueness of the human creative element is going to rise and go up in value. I think you're raising a great point, is that there will still always be a request for, oh, that's a real thing. There was some human deeper in that.
One of the things that I love about living in LA, and I actually love a lot about living in LA, aside from the earthquakes and the heat, but I do love Los Angeles, and there's always some counter to something. And the example that I'll give here is I love live music. I love going out and hearing, or just going out and listening to music, whether it's live or not. So I try to keep my finger on the pulse of what's going on. But here we are in the streaming era, right? And what I've noticed over the past few years, both after and just before COVID, is this pop-up of vinyl record bars, right? Yeah, that have just been there. Yeah. So this push for old school. So just to that point again of this counterculture, where there's a push in this certain direction, there's a counter push. I don't know if it's equal and opposite, but I imagine it will lead to creativity in many ways.
All right. Do we have time for one more question? Sure. Yes. Okay. Great. Excellent.
Okay, so
Hi, my name is Fadi Amri. I'm a lawyer from Saudi Arabia, and I'm one of the LLM students at Duke University. So my question is, as AI has a variety of specializations, how do you see AI entertainment law as a promising field for lawyers in the upcoming years? Is it a promising field for us?
Oh, I definitely think I think it's promising. I think, yeah, I guess I could just say, yeah, I think it's promising. But I think it's important that the focus not only be on AI, but on the industry as a whole, right? You know, where is there space and opportunity with AI for me to provide service? And so, like I'd said previously, I think understanding the different components, like IP, like copyright, like licensing, I think this is going to be a big issue as location-based entertainment is built out across the globe as well. Obviously, we're talking about, for example, theme parks, maybe escape rooms, things like that. But I think there's an incredible opportunity in that space. So understanding that business as well is an area that can be explored. So I think just focusing on AI is not necessarily the path that I would recommend, but understanding the industry and trying to determine, okay, well, where can my skills best be utilized, whether it's in the IP space, in the employment space, you know, in all the, hey, even in, they're going to speak about employment later on, so I won't get into that. But I mean, all of these areas are under the entertainment umbrella. So just
Something we were chatting about, all the industry and every industry is wanting is individuals who are hungry to hunt for something new, right? Just as opposed to saying this is what the law is, this is a space where everyone's going to be asking, what can the law be, right? Where there is no law, technology will go without boundaries. And we need to be really always cognizant of what we want the boundary to be or not be. So as long as you're interested in saying, what do I not know? You'll be fine.
Absolutely.
You will always stay gainfully employed.
That's a great point.